I've got it's recording now, so whenever you're ready.
Okay, well, I'm Betty Mitchell, and I had the privilege, and I call it a privilege, to work at Brett's for 26 years. We moved to Mankato, and I thought when my family got a little bit older that I would get a job somewhere, a part-time job, because we had twins, Brad and Brian, that were 6 months old, and I thought, I wonder if I could be, it would be a little relief for me to get away. So I found a wonderful babysitter. Her name was Wander C. She took him, and I started part-time at Brett's, and I got the job right away. And I don't remember who was, maybe it was Mary Ann Montag, who was the personnel director at that time.
Yeah.
And she said, oh, we use part-time people all the time. And I had to talk to Brett Taylor Jr., and he said, we'd love to have you part-time. Well, I enjoy people, and I love selling. I was in cosmetics. I started there, and that's where I was till I quit working at 26 years. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't long. Brett said, you know, we need a buyer for this department. And there was a gal there, and I thought, why is he letting her go? Is he going to hire me and let me go? That was one thing Brett Taylor Jr. really never did. If you were doing your job, you had a job for life. He kept us on for, many people were older, and I loved my job. It was, I enjoyed getting up and going to work and making people feel good about themselves with the makeup, and it wasn't long. I was doing a TV show on Friday afternoons with Dixie Johnson, and she would talk about the wardrobe, what you were to put together, and I would maybe do a makeup demonstration or just talk. Dixie and I had a great time doing that show.
Neither you or Dixie had any loss of conversation.
Are you saying we talked too much? We did have a great time, and I helped with the any style shows. I did the makeup, and then it wasn't long. Organizations were calling Brett's for a program, and I went out and did TV. I went out and did programs for Brett's, and that was wonderful. It was fun, and so it wasn't long. I was gone from home quite a bit at night because all their meetings, you know, were at night, and so I did that. So pretty soon it was kind of ending up to be a full-time job. So then I became the buyer. In fact, I was looking for the certificates. One thing I was so glad of was that we got a certificate for every 5 years of service. And I have one for my 20th year. And I wish I'd have had that. We could have put that on you know, the screen. But I didn't find it now when I looked for it. But Brett's were a family store. We all felt like we were family. And if anything happened in anyone's family, it was just like I was telling you earlier, that when my husband died, Brett was turkey hunting in the Dakotas. And he called me that night. And he said, what can we do? I said, you aren't even home. I said, there's nothing you can do. And what they set up for me to take as much time off as possible, and they took really good care of my family till I got back on my feet. So there were just so many things they were.
Yeah, they basically did that for almost every employee.
They
that
did.
had any problem.
Yeah. Another thing, Donna, I remember was our parties. we it was great to have a party after a sale. We had two big sales a year. The one that I remember the most was the Pioneer sale.
Or
in
the
fall.
anniversary one in the spring.
Anniversary.
Yeah.
We wore long dresses to our party after the press party.
Well, that was, yeah.
And-
We dressed up back in those days.
Oh yeah. So it was fun times, and it was just like a Brett's family for all of us. And when we just had our reunion now that Mary Cassim and I put together, the people that turned out we never thought would,
Yeah.
but they wanted to still be a part of the Brett's organization, and now we have continued. It's a smaller group. We call it our, what do we call that, Donna? I don't know what, but we're continuing to get together once a month.
Kind of like the BS Club.
Yeah, the BS Club, yeah, is right. But there's just so many good things. And the New York trips, that was wonderful. They started sending us on a per diem when we would go to New York, and it wasn't long. I think it was Mary and I, maybe, that we decided we were going to start taking some snacks along on the plane so that we could take our per diem money and go to the place. So we did that. I think you were in on that, maybe, Donna. And so we would have our crackers and cheese or something in the room and take that money and go to a play, because we weren't about to spend our own money because the plays were expensive.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate the times I was in New York with you folks, was the fact that a lot of people in the linen, housewares section, their salesmen would give out free tickets.
Oh, yeah.
And so I never had to pay to go to a theater, because one of the buyers would get free tickets, and I'd piggy lock back along.
And we'd ask the other buyers. So we had
Yeah.
a lot of neat parties.
Yeah.
One was out on that big ship one night.
I wasn't there that year.
We had the cocktails on one level of and then the next level we had the dinner, and then we went to the third level of the ship for a dance.
Wow.
So, and some of them couldn't dance too well because they thought it was a little rough, and I don't think that was probably what the problem was.
Might have been one too many cocktails.
It might have been.
Donna, do you want to introduce yourself too?
Oh, sure. I'm Donna Strand, and I started in September of 1960. I had been out of college for a while and didn't know where I really wanted to go because my training was in accounting. Anyhow, the employment agency which used to have offices on the third floor of Brett's said, well, I want you to go up and talk to Larry Fowler. He's up on fourth floor. And I said, oh, what does Mr. Fowler do? And he said, well, his wife was an original Brett, part of the first family. Mm-hmm. And he come back after working for Sears Roebuck for many, many years. He was vice president of their catalog division. And he just wanted to come back here where he could raise his son and see him, because they never knew if he was in New York or L.A. or where he was going to end up being, Chicago. And so in my estimation, he's one of the gentlemen or family members, whatever you want to call them, along with Brett Jr., that really brought the Brett's family to the forefront. They made him a modern part of the society and all of the things going on in the world. And so anyhow, I said, okay, I'll go talk to him, but I don't know anything about advertising. So I went up and we sat and talked for 2 hours. And he said, I'll give you a call tomorrow and to see if you're interested in accepting the position. And it would be for advertising manager, and I would have to do all of the layouts, all of the advertising, radio, newspaper, direct mail, all of that. And I said, I don't know anything about it. Well, as I earlier said, I went to work. I accepted the position, went to work. I quit every day for 6 months. I'd go into to Larry Fowler and say, I will never get this into my noggin, never. And 6 months later, I stopped quitting, and I ended up being there over 32 years and helped close all of the stores.
Okay.
So, I was in charge of advertising, direct mail, radio, TV, any broadcaster or medium with the charge customers, what have you. And only that, I had shows and exhibits in which Dixie Johnson was in charge.
Mm-hmm.
I was in charge of that part of it. John Turner with all of his wonderful displays in store and in the windows. Everybody remembers his windows. And all the national awards that he won.
Mm-hmm.
And his young staff of young men, that knew just how to do all this stuff. And every employee loved those young guys because they just fit right in with everybody else. Betty alluded to the fact of everybody being family. And it's very true. You knew the name of every employee, their husband, their kids. You knew if one of their kids was sick, died, what happened, and everybody would pull together. And that's the kind of family operation it was. We lost some of that when we started branching out and opening stores. Like our first one in Owatonna wasn't bad, because then we got to know a lot of people there. But as you went on to Faribault and Hutchinson and Marshall and Fairmont and opening their other Brett stores, you knew the buyer, you knew the store manager. And that was basically, at once in a while, you know some of the employees.
Sure.
But you lost some of that real close contact. And
I forgot about how we had to go to all those stores once a week.
oh yeah,
Because I had cosmetics in 6 stores. And then you can tell them about how they bought the Ayler stores
oh yeah.
and expanded, and so it ended up to be 18 stores. We didn't have cosmetics in all of them, but we did. I had to go to Hutchinson, Owatonna, Fairmont, Faribault, yeah. So all the buyers, and my contact with Donna, anytime I was going to run a promotion for cosmetics, and she comes in with her newspaper, Betty, you got to okay this. Is everything right on this paper? And if it wasn't right, she'd be back in. But she didn't really know what it was right.
I didn't know that much about cosmetics.
No.
Yeah, but
But I learned a lot too
yes,
over
she
the
did,
years.
I'm sure.
You've mentioned Dixie's name a couple of times, and that's one that I have heard before associated with Brett's. Can you tell me a little bit more about who Dixie was and what she did? For the
Dixie
store?
was one of the most vivacious people that I know. And I see her occasionally, but of course now she has some health problems right now, so it's sad to see her like this, but she was she was the person I think probably people thought of as Brett because
Oh, yeah.
she was a spokesman, don't you?
Well,
don't you think?
not only between all the style shows, and of course we were the first place in the state that ended up with a teen board that was extremely active with style shows, whatever,
in Jackson
and in the
East.
schools. And then we had the TV show, and so Dixie was known in all of southern Minnesota. No ifs, ands, or buts. She really
Yeah.
was. She'd go out and do style shows for groups, for organizations, and you'd see her running around, and then we'd have to load all those clothes into
Oh yeah.
one of the vans or one of the, the trucks that we used with the rolling coats and everything would go right in there. But
We did a lot of free programs for organizations in Mankato.
Yeah.
And we were called, like, especially in the winter, that was their program to do
Yeah.
those things. Another person I was thinking of was Deb Schlingman. She did our windows.
Yeah.
What she said she learned from John Turner. I know when I started, I thought, he dressed different, I want to say.
well, he was a typical artist. He really was.
He was a typical artist. But Deb
So
Schlingman
talented.
said, I never thought I would learn what I did from John Turner.
And
He was great.
Deb was a great display manager. She really was. She was under my regime too, as far as all the visual presentation and stuff. And she had a staff under her, and she was in charge of all those and all of the outlying stores besides. So when she would put together and we would work on a budget or what have you, it was she that decided, okay, this is where the Christmas trees will go, this is where that'll go, this is how we'll do spring, we'll do fall. And then she would go out to the stores to make sure it was put together right.
Okay. Anybody else that comes to mind? Who comes up at the reunions all the time? Who you? Oh, and do you remember?
Well, two people. Well, when I started, Brett Taylor was my boss for most of the years that I was there. And then I had Chuck Townsend. Chuck Townsend, he was a merchandiser. The merchandisers were over the buyers. Chuck Townsend was great. Ron Peterson, and neither of them are with us any
No,
longer.
they're both deceased, yes.
Uh-huh. And, you know, some of those people, Elaine Schonenberger was another merchandiser, and they just had some wonderful people that took those roles. And then when the mall came in, that's when things weren't going so good downtown. And we always told Brett if he would have gone in the mall, we'd probably, maybe we'd be working, Donna.
Oh, the way retail has gone today, I don't know.
No,
It's
I
a whole
think
different
so.
ball game
Yeah.
than when we were in it. Retail then, I have to admit, was fun.
Yeah.
There was not one day I can ever remember getting up and saying, I don't want to go to work.
Yeah.
You saved that feeling for the end of the
No,
day.
I got up and I was happy as a lark to go out the door and get to work. And
But
yeah,
the Fowlers were a great family, like you say, Larry.
Oh.
And then Larry Jr. and Betsy. That's where I got to know Larry and Betsy Fowler. And I still correspond with Betsy. Larry's no longer with us anymore either. He is deceased. But I understand Betsy was just married now. She should be. So there's lots of good memories of their family. Eloise Lehman, or not Eloise Lehman, Eloise Fowler.
she was Brett Sr.'s sister.
Yes. One thing I remember about Brett Taylor Sr., having been in cosmetics for all those years, he came to open the door every single morning. And if there was anything out of place, that front of the store was a
Get
presentation.
rid of that box.
Yeah.
Turn off that light.
Betty, you've got to get, there's an empty box there. You've got to get that box out of there, Betty. And, yes, Mr. Taylor. He was a wonderful man.
That was senior, you said?
Brett Taylor Sr.
Yeah.
And then when he was no longer with us any longer, Brett Taylor opened the door. And he was much more jovial and just much more friendly.
Yeah.
Brett Taylor Sr., he meant business. This is a business. But a wonderful man.
Oh, yeah.
Now, Betty, when you started out, you said working the floor basically, doing cosmetics. What was a normal kind of day for you? What was the interaction with customers? How did you work with the people at the store?
Well, cosmetics was always in the front of the store. And I was trained, you greet everyone that comes in that door with a smile, and that's the way I was trained, and all of us were. That's the way you would want to be treated. And I worked in the department, and at that time I was given 2 different lines, like Estee Lauder, for instance, and we had, like the Dayton's lines. We carried all those cosmetic brands.
We had all the major brands.
Yeah, we did. We were known as the Daytons of southern Minnesota. And then I did the hiring of the people who worked in the department. We eventually had 5. They each had a line and took care of those Estee Lauder, Elizabeth Arden, and we had all the fragrances that Dayton's carried. So, but we were responsible for taking care of the stock and keeping your cases immaculate. One of the management might come by. you know, you better straighten up that bottle in the case, you know. And there again, Brett Taylor Sr. was the one, he wanted things presentable.
One of the things that they really believed in was the fact that when your first impression of the store when you walk in should be the best.
Mm-hmm.
That's why cosmetics were always in the front. You'd get all those beautiful aromas coming out at you. Everything would be all color coordinated, whatever, you know, depending on the line. And you would see that. Then from there you'd go into jewelry, which was another part of it, you know, and it was just, you had to have everything in apple pie order, so to say.
Yeah, I'm sure nowadays there's some scientific study about, you know, what department follows which, you know, how you lead people through the store. Can you give just a little recounting of, you talked about beauty, you talked about jewelry. What was the layout of the store?
Well, it all depended on what store you were in.
Oh.
In Mankato, of course, we were on different floors. So all the home stuff was downstairs in the basement, the lower level. And all of the accessory things were on first floor. Second floor, you went into all of the ready-to-wear and then off into the lingerie and the foundations and the beauty shop. You got up to third floor and there you'd have all the linens and fabrics and whatever. You know, and then later on when we added north, the men's and the fabric and the children's were all over there. But it all followed a pattern and tried to put it together. And we had some very unique buyers who knew their job so well. You know, you talk about fabrics, or as piece goods, as Olive Thomas used to refer to it. And she had been there for 30-some years, too. And it was just, if you wanted to know anything about sewing, you go see Olive. That was it. Absolutely anything. And she knew how to do it. She made all of her own clothes, everything. Including her coats.
Oh, I didn't know she made her coats.
Oh, yeah, she would make everything.
Yeah.
Just absolutely. And, you know, most of the children's buyers were all mothers, so they knew what kids needed, you know. And the men's buyers, are, you know, well, they just catered to the men. You get upstairs and you'd have all these women that either one part of the business or another, whether it was dresses, coats, and then the bridal shop. The bridal shop we had, that was the only one we had in Mankato, and only in the Mankato store. And that one was run by Mary Helen Jones. And Mary Helen, I think, put on the weddings for almost everybody back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. I mean, it was, if you got married, your dress came from Brett's. That was just about it.
And you talk about people, you wanted to know, Mike, on the people that were there. Marlene Shalgren, excuse me, was another one. She lives in Florida now.
Yeah.
She was the ready-to-wear. Oh, my. She was great at her job.
Yeah.
Doretha McCullough had the millinery. And that was her baby.
Oh, and DC knew hats and accessories.
And our beauty shop, John St. Peter.
Yeah. And Earl, his dad, started it, you know.
So there's just, many of these people are no longer with us anymore. And we talked about that at our party that we had that night. I think that could have gone on for, we thought there might be a half hour.
Everybody had a story to tell.
Oh, my.
Every one of them had a story to tell about something that had happened, either with them or in their circle of friends at Brett's and what have you. And it just kept snowballing. Well, were there 39 of us there that night? And from all different areas, you know.
Yeah.
And they all talked about what they did, where they had been, whatever. You know, no different than when I started out in the advertising department, later on became advertising manager. And from there, when Larry Fowler retired, I was named vice president of marketing and would go and...
I never got the vice president name in mind.
But you know, they had the Brett's family just was not run by men. There were 3 women vice presidents also. And so we were pretty evenly split between the merchandise managers and Brett Jr. or Sr. and the 3 women. and we all had equal say, and they would listen to whatever everybody said.
That was pretty forward thinking for the
We
time.
made the decisions as a group, not as any one person. And I ran my division the same way. We'd get together when we're talking about what we're going to do for Christmas. You'd get John Turner in there. You'd get Dixie in there. You'd get my advertising manager in there. You'd get some of the other people would join us and add in their part. And Brett Jr.'s sister Jean was worked with me, and she would add in a few things from a family perspective, or Scott or Mark or somebody would come along, And it wasn't like it was just people in the store. Before Nancy joined the regime of us,
And Scott.
she would be in there, and Scott would be in there. And I remember Scott telling about things when he was selling popsicles on Crazy Days as a kid, So a lot of them learned from the ground up. It was that's the way you did it, Brett. So they weren't afraid to promote from within. In fact, they encouraged it.
Another person that comes to mind is Jane Confer. She was brought in as a merchandiser, and she was my supervisor as well as, how many did she have? I know she had Mary Cassom, and how many did she have?
Well, I don't remember. It was 4 or 5 of them.
But she brought class to Brits.
She was another vice president.
Yes, she was. Yeah.
And her background was from Dayton, so she'd come down when Scott worked at Dayton's as a internship, after school and what have you, and just like Brett Jr. worked at Carson Perry Scott in Chicago before he come back and joined the family. So it wasn't like they got right into it without some experience. They worked for other stores besides.
And it sounds like they hired local people, and who brought the knowledge of the audience base, but then they also used that opportunity to learn the game, the department store game.
Absolutely.
Did they do a lot of sending people off to conferences or other learning experiences? Or?
Yeah, it was like every year I would go into what was referred to as the Retail Advertising Conference in Chicago. I had the honor of winning several national awards from some of the stuff that my staff had put together in newspaper, TV. I can still remember the first time we did a TV commercial. The gal, one of my staff who did a signing for us, had a little cocker. And that cocker was in that TV commercial, which was very, very neat and unusual, talking about changes and things, and as you grow up, you learn what happens in the retail industry. And anyhow, I would go into Chicago every year, and I encouraged my staff, some of them, to come with me. So they got experience meeting all these people from all over the United States, some of them from Canada. And we would exchange ideas and bring in and compete against each other with some of our promotions. And that's how you learned and kept on growing.
The training that I had, I went to a lot of cosmetic schools in Minneapolis. And then I would always take the person that might be assigned to that line at Brett's. And like if they had Estee Lauder, and when I became a buyer, I no longer was on the floor anymore. Because then I thought, I am never going to learn how to do those buying plans. But you do. You learn to do your buying, and and basically, especially Brett Taylor Jr., he must have thought I knew what I was doing, because I knew what money I had to spend in each line. And that's what you worked with. And cosmetics was very successful. But all my training, and then I went to New York like 3 times a year. I went to Chicago several times. But all the people in my department also went to Minneapolis to school for their training in whatever particular line of cosmetics they were representing. So it was an interesting job.
Yeah.
It also seems like one that you just spent a lot of time interacting and learning from the people who were buying the product.
Well, you do.
Some of the employees would honestly come in and say, "Did you ever think about doing this and so?" I was talking with my neighbor and they thought that this would be a good idea, you know, and that's how some of our promotions or things started. Honestly and truthfully, and mushroomed. You know, we did strange things at when we had crazy days. We did crazy things for in the spring. I remember Scott telling the story about one of our promotions around President's Day, and we threw paper plates off of the 4th floor, and people were standing down on Jackson Street trying to catch those because it had discounts, free gifts, whatever on them. Man, you almost had a stampede of people, you know. We wondered if we were going to get by without a lawsuit. So, in the same way, you know, you open the door and the first people in would get something, and they would go running off. They might be able to buy a whole set of china for 50 cents or something really different and ridiculous. But it was the way we brought people into the store.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about the teen board? That's certainly something I remember. If you know how it came about and what their function was?
That was Dixie.
Well, yeah, that was Dixie's big regime, and we'd work with her all the time. We started out with having members of Mankato West. You added Mankato East into it, Loyola. We even had some from St. Peter once in a while. And so these young ladies became ambassadors of breasts in their local schools. And then they would also be in the store, and some of them worked part-time, all of them would work when we did style shows and things. One of the biggest style shows that the teen board did was up at Mankato State University, you know, this started back in the 60s. Larry Fowler was still there and worked to get it started. And we would work our little fannies off in order to have the best style show you've ever seen, and we would draw hundreds of people. And we filled that MSU ballroom, I don't know how many times, with just young kids that had to come see what was new and what their friends were talking about. And yeah, it just expanded from there. And
that went on for many years.
Many, many years. Yeah.
Do you remember, did it die out for lack of interest, or was it something that was just not as
functional?
Well,
it died out basically because a lot of the students got into so many different activities.
Yeah.
Where it was hard to find time to be able to do some of the things that we used to do. And so we just realized that everything was changing as kids were growing up. And they were in so many things at school that just took their time. They didn't have time for this anymore.
Gotcha.
But we always had a few people around. You know, or there's some of those kids would keep on working, or their friends would stay working, or whatever. So you'd still have some ambassadors, as we called them, because they were the best ambassadors
And it
we
was
had
an
with
honor
kids.
to be on the team board.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, they really felt good about being
And a lot of
chosen.
those teen board members went on to become buyers. Actually began working for the store.
Joanne Paradis.
Yeah, Joanne Paradis was one. Connor was another. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, she was the first buyer for when we had when we opened up Jackson's place for girls. You know,
Who's that, you mean?
Mrs. Connor.
Oh, Chris Connor.
Chris Connor.
Chris Connor.
And Chris is still in town. Later on, after Breast Close, she opened her own shop. Had a dress shop for quite a few years. And but she was the first person who managed Madison or Jackson East. And
Yeah.
Is
And
that
she opened a store
Christine
of her
Jim's
own.
wife, or is that Jim's wife?
Yes.
Christine. Okay.
yeah, and she was on the first team board. And eventually started working in Jackson East, and then became buyer for that. Her sister was, like you mentioned, was buyer for jewelry. And
Then
so
she-
a lot of things, it's all
Chris opened her
family
own
orientated
store.
somewhere along the line.
Chris opened her own store then.
Yes, she did. On 2nd Street. Yep. Right next to the ramp there.
It was a good training ground.
Yeah. And Chris was at that party we held too here this last
Yeah,
April.
she came,
Yep.
and she hadn't been at the store for a long, long time, but The one thing we were talking about that party, I found out that night that some of the people who worked in housewares have been getting together for lunch ever since the store closed. I did not know it till that night,
I didn't either.
and I heard from some
So
of them.
there were a lot of areas that would just get together on their own.
Mm-hmm.
It was more difficult in my division because a lot of those people moved off and went into retail in other areas as they grew up, the ones that worked with John.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so they went off and worked. Some of them worked for Dayton, some of them worked for Hudson's, you know, and a few of the other stores around. One went out and was in Portland,
Yeah.
you know. And so I never had that cohesive group that stayed put in Mankato. They all went out and grew.
But we would always invite you to our parties. So. And Donna as well.
Well, I have to admit, you know, I'm one of those that when Brett's closed, I had to make up a decision. Do I stay in retail marketing or do I choose another profession?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think I was 52 at that point, and I'm going, I don't want to live in a big city.
Mm-hmm.
So I had gone out, I had interviewed with Hudson's in Detroit, I'd gone out to Seattle, I'd gone to Portland, a couple others. And I went, no, I just don't want to do that. So I decided I would choose another vocation. And I had already started breaking out a little bit, and I had a couple of rental properties that I had purchased when I was working at Brett's.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went into real estate, and I was there for 22 years.
Yeah, you were.
So I stayed in Mankato, which was my heart and love, and I wanted to be here.
All right. Did you grow up in Mankato? Or you...
Well, I grew up close. I grew up in Rapidan, 8 miles south. Small town gal, you know. And my dad was a farmer, and you know, and my mother worked in a bank, and so I just got used to being in a small town. And Mankato at that point was a small town. It's not anymore, but it was then. And as we branched out, I was there when we opened the first one in Owatonna. And I was there when we opened all of them. I was there when we closed them all.
And it was not sad. Or not, it was sad.
Yeah, I had to ride the truck to Detroit Lakes and close the Ayler store up there. And yeah, and you know, when you branch out to those other parts, because we had 12 Ayler stores and 8 of the Bretts and well, we had 13 of Aylers. 13 Ayler stores.
Yeah.
And when I got to Detroit Lakes, it was the driver and myself and this big truck and a little pup to hold all the display props and what have you. And I had the distinct honor of being able to tell people they were going to be out of a job and they would get this for severance or whatever, you know. And I said, it's your choice if you want to help us to pack up and move all the stuff out, because we will be moving it out tonight. Every employee stayed to help. So that speaks about the integrity of all the people we hired in the other towns. They all stayed and they helped, and they were real sad to see us close, but they really appreciated what they had when they were with us. And that's the kind of family we were.
Yeah. Yeah, everybody.
And
I was one, though, you stayed till the end. It got to the end that, well, Ann Christian, her office was combined with mine, and we didn't really have anything to do because we couldn't do any more buying. So we'd get to, but we were asked if we would stick it out a little longer. We'd grab our cup of coffee in the morning, and the 3rd floor at that time was already closed out, moved all the stuff there. We'd take our coffee up on 3rd floor and sit on the floor and cry.
Oh, there were a lot of tears shed when that store closed.
And, but we didn't have anything to do. And finally, Brett Scott was my boss at that time. And I finally went into him one day and I said, you know, we really don't have anything to do. And he said, are you saying you want to be done? And I said, yes, I think I do, because I knew the end was coming.
Yeah.
And I knew it was like about a week away. And he said, when do you want to be done? And I said, I'd like to be done Friday this week. And so I left the week before. And didn't go down for the closing. I knew I couldn't handle that. Yeah. It was a store that meant a lot to many, many people.
Oh, the day we closed those main doors in Mankato. Oh, there wasn't a dry tear on first floor.
I know.
I suppose.
Yeah, I'm sure not. So I was a chicken and left a week early.
Well, I left a week and a half or almost 2 weeks before the store finally sold out the last of the stuff. But it was because my niece was getting married in Chicago on the 8th of August. And I wanted to be at the wedding.
Sure.
So Brett said, well, will you come back? And I said, Brett, once I go out that door, I don't think I'm coming back again.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it, yeah, and then
Although I did go back just to walk in and say hi. But it was, that was tough. Yeah.
but it was a great family store in, from our last party, and we're gonna continue to get together.
Yeah.
But.
Till we're all gone.
Yeah, but we won't do it every year.
Yeah.
At least that was the consensus.
Yeah.
Because Mary and I said, we're not doing it next year. We're not going to plan it.
But we're not going to go another 20 years before we
No,
get together
we
because
shouldn't.
none of us will probably be around at that point.
Yeah.
That's why some of us broke off and are meeting monthly now to have lunch and
Yeah, we
And,
have to. We have to keep that
talk a
going.
little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But good memories.
yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. You know, it was just like I went into Vine and signed up for their exercise program and what have you, just specifically that because I had a total knee last spring. And I knew I had to keep exercising or I would just lose a lot of the stuff, the progress I've made. And I was sitting there having a cup of coffee with a bunch of the other members the other morning. And I have to admit, they were all older than I was, you know, and geez, I'm 77. Almost. And I sat there with them, and when they found out it was from Brett's, and they all started talking about,
Oh,
that was the place to go, and what have you, and what a friendly bunch of people. And all of these things we've been talking about came out through customers. And all of these ladies, there were 4 of us around the table besides myself, and they all said the same thing. You don't get that kind of service, you don't get that kind of help anymore.
Anywhere.
And I said, that's part of the retail conglomerate that has evolved. Everybody's so busy, they want to get in, get something, get out. That's it.
When you talk about the customers, one more thing I want to add, Mike, is that to this day, people, if I'm introduced to someone, they'll say, where do I know you from? And I'll let them think a little bit. Did you work at Brett's? And I said, yes, and that's where it comes.
Yeah.
They remember the people that worked there. You became real good friends of all those customers.
Well, it's no different than at Vine. I see all these faces, and I know I've seen them, and it's got to be at Brett's because I wasn't on the floor on a day-to-day basis. Because I sat up in the office and we did all the preliminary stuff before and after. And but when we have major sales, whether it be a 12-hour sale or during Christmas, whatever, and all vice presidents had to be there one night a week because we would close the store at night. My night was Tuesdays, and everybody else had something. And you know, it was just one of those things. You were there all the time. And, you know, and major sales, whatever. I can remember working up on 4th. That's when my office used to be on 4th floor. Before we moved over to the annex and some of the other places. The janitors would go home at 10 o'clock at night. Lock down the elevators. Now, how do you get off a 4th floor besides walk all the stairs? Whatever. And, of course, they'd set the alarms on all the doors, and I'm going, I'm not going out those. So when I locked the door behind me on 4th floor and go down to 3rd floor, which still used to have the professional offices there before it became retail, and I would walk through, you know, feeling the side of the walls as I'd get out to where we went out to the stairway going down from 3rd floor to
Down
the
the side
street.
street. Yeah.
Boy, if somebody had jumped out of one of those offices, I would have probably been died of a heart attack. But I can work. I remember working till 12 midnight, 1 o'clock, you know, and then getting out and going home because I had finished what I wanted to do that day.
Mm-hmm.
And I would work, you know, at certain times of the year. I'd be there at least 100 hours a week without any batting an eye. And I thought nothing of it.
No.
And I wasn't paid by the hour either. You know, you did it because you loved your job.
All right.